Hey, how's it going? Today we're going to talk about near-death experiences. Have you ever had one? Hopefully not. Let's continue with the stories. Famous author George Orwell was shot in 1937. He was in Spain fighting in their civil war when a bullet pierced his throat. The whole experience of being hit by a bullet, he said, was very interesting. Orwell wrote that it happened and he think it was worth describing in detail. Roughly speaking, it was the sensation of being the center of an explosion. There seemed to be a loud bang and a blinding flash of light all around him, and he felt a tremendous shock. No pain, only a violent shock, such as you get from an electrical terminal. With it, a sense of utter weakness, of feeling being stricken or shriveled up to nothing. He didn't know how badly he was hurt, but he tried to move his arm. It didn't respond. He tried to speak, but nothing came out. Then he heard one of the soldiers say that the bullet had gone clear through his neck. Orson knew he was dying. My first thought, he said, conventionally enough, was to write to my wife. My second thought was violent, reminiscent of having to leave the world. It frustrated him that he died so stupidly by chance. The meaninglessness of it, he said. He couldn't bring himself through to feel angry at the man who shot him. If he had been taken prisoner and brought before him of this movement, he would nearly have congratulated him on the good shooting. What a word of a man. Grant Allen nearly drowned during a skating accident. For a moment, Allen insisted he was dead. As far as his consciousness goes, he wrote, "I was then there dead, and I never expected to be any deader." The ice beneath him cracked while he was skating, and Allen fell into the freezing water below. He tried to swim up to the surface, but hit his head against the solid ice overhead. Allen couldn't think straight. "I was numb with cold ice, stubbornly, and stunned with suddenness of the unsinkable Duncan." Instead of looking for the hole he made, he stated, bashing his head against the ice. "Trying to break through, I gasped and swallowed a great deal of water," he said. "I felt my lungs filling, a moment of suspense during which I knew perfectly well I was drowning. Intervened, and then I died." His life did not flash before his eyes. On the contrary, he felt only a sense of cold and dampness, and breathlessness as well, while struggling and holding his breath, and then it was all over. His friends managed to pull him out and bring him back to life. Allen was probably dead. The actual dying itself, he said, as dying quite painless and just like falling asleep. His only struggle previously was a sense of reproach of being uncomfortable. Way to go, man. In 1957, a snake expert, Carl Peterson Schmidt, was trying to identify a snake when he was bitten. Over the next 24 hours, he documented everything that he experienced as the venom took his life. 4:30 to 5:30 p.m., he wrote when he got home. Strong nausea, but without vomiting during his trip homestead on a train. An hour later, he added a strong chill and shaking following his fever as well, which did not persist with blankets and so forth. Bleeding of mucous membranes in the mouth began at 5:30, apparently mostly from his gums. He managed to get a couple hours of sleep, of course, that is wonderful, and woke up at midnight. Urination at 12:20 a.m. He noted most blood but small in the mouth. He woke up again in a short time later, vomiting. His late entry came at 6:30 a.m. Slight bleeding is now going into the bowels, with frequent irritation in the anus. Mouth and nose continues to bleed, not excessively. By lunchtime, he called his wife in panic. When the doctors found him, he was in sweat, unable to answer anything they asked. He was pronounced dead at 3 p.m. Lovely. Science fiction writer H.G. Wells, which wrote War of the Worlds, nearly died in the late 1800s when he was young. He had consumption today known as tuberculosis. No one expected him to survive during that time frame. It struck him during a game of football. "There was a vast pain in my side," he said. "My courage failed me. I couldn't run. I couldn't kick." Wells excused himself in which was inside. "I was violently sick," he said. "I went to lay down. Then I moved to urinate and found myself stirring about in a chamber pot half full of blood. That was the most dismal moment in my life. I did not know what to do. I lay down again to wait for someone to come. Later, the doctor told Wells that he had almost 6 months to live. Wells kept going to school while the illness ate him alive. By night, he had to deal with his imminent death approaching mindset. "In my bones," he said, "I dislike the idea of dying. I was expected not to become famous, not to have seen the world. Worse, though, were the unfulfilled sexual urges of a young dying boy. Don't we all know that? Still more deeply exacerbated was I was the nets of restraint about me that threatened I would die a virgin. That's a way to think about before you die." He felt an uncontrollable rage against women for not sleeping with him. The fear of non-existence frightened him the most. "Though I delivered intelligibly immortality, I found it impossible to imagine myself non-existent. I had a nightmare sense of the approach of the consciousness with nothingness." Wells, of course, survived. His body fought off the sickness. His fear of disappearing into the nothingness changed his life. This moment sparked his resolve to mark himself as a superior writer, or a writer that is known among many people, with many things that he wrote. In 2013, Syrian rebel Qasem Ed was in Dashmar when it was hit by Syrian gas. He heard a rocket hit the ground, but it didn't explode like it expected. Instead, gas spilled over it. "It took just a few seconds," he said, "before I lost my ability to breathe. I felt my chest was set on fire. My eyes were burning like hell. I was unable to even scream or anything." He started to pound his chest, trying to force himself to breathe. "It was so painful," he said. "It felt like somebody was tearing up my chest with a knife." His neighbor knocked on his door begging for help. Her children were dying from vomiting some white substance out of their mouths. She and most others around didn't make it to be alive, unfortunately. He said, "I watched hundreds of people die suffocating. My heart practically stopped, and I was placed with the dead bodies." Eid was pulled out of the body pile when he managed to make a sign of life. He survived, but wouldn't go through hell getting there. "Dying this way," he said afterward, "is one of the ugliest ways of death known through history, unfortunately." It was wonderful, Annette Morjane said about her experience with death in 2006. She was dying of cancer with no hope of survival and slipped into a coma. She threw beliefs that it was something more that was actually passed over to the other side. "It is difficult to describe." She said, "It was like I left my body and my consciousness, and I was everywhere in itself, in a godlike state where I could see my loved ones and feel the presence of other souls." How romantic. "When I went to other dimensions, I felt an overwhelming sense of love and peace. I felt no pain. I found out my purpose in life and what I must do. I realized that the solution of the cancer was always within me." Cute. After she came out of it, her body went through a miraculous recovery. Within 4 days, and 70% of her cancer was gone. Within 5 weeks, she was completely healed. Beautiful. Not every vision of the afterlife is so peaceful, unfortunately, as we have nightmares and so forth. Like Matthew Botsford went into a coma and saw what a glimpse of afterlife was on the other side. But a vision wasn't quite cheerful, to say the least. "I felt a hot needle-like pierce, extruding pain for a pure instant at the top of my head," as he said. "Then utter the darkness enveloped me as if thick blackness came upon me." For the next 27 days, his body was in a coma, but his soul delivers beliefs was trapped in hell. "Reaching out only proved to me that I was actually contained in some sort of cell, cold, permanent, in a very marrow of bones. He felt like he was naked and helpless, and surrounded by a demonic presence. I could feel the actual presence of evil pressing against my body, such as jalapeno peppers. Others than the evil, he couldn't feel much. There was no breathing. There was no thoughts at all. I had no thoughts of anything or hopelessness, and dread, doom, and gloom was upon him. That sounds like a wonderful life. The oldest description ever found by a near-death experience was written in the 18th century by Pierre Jean de Mial, a French physician. He was treating a man with a fever who briefly lost consciousness. Dumas wrote down the man described. He reported loss of external sensations. He also described he saw such a pure and extreme light that he thought he was in heaven. He remembered his sensation very well and affirmed that never all his life that he would have a nicer moment. He also described, he said that the records of these experiences went back at least 12th century, when a theologian wrote, "At the moment of approaching our body and soul desolation, the latter is lit of primarily light." Dumas didn't believe it was a spiritual experience though. All the blood and humors flow abundantly. He wrote that it was precious of blood, a fusion that excites this vivid and strong sensations. It is quite equivalent description that makes the sensation pleasant, miraculous. Chris Galcios kept a blog while she battled pancreas cancer. When it was clear that she wouldn't survive, she wrote on her final entry she was trying to describe what it felt like for dying. She wrote, "You won't die like this. I had a lung collapse twice. I've had edema that makes me look like a painting by Bertier. Edema hurts to walk on, and you can barely bend your knees going down the stairs. It can cause tissue breakdown and sepsis. I had days when I've woken thinking that I was drowning because I had a throat full of bile and a burned stomach ache as well." She still felt angry, of course. "I admit to some frustration," she wrote. "I play in a real estate investment business, low end with vision. I will never do this." Her biggest worry, though, was for her family and the people who cared about her. "I just want to die in too much pain, surrounded by loved ones I love. The ones who must live with the agony, the ones who love me as well," unfortunately. Understanding death is such an obsession that has become a science. A whole community of experts has studied this version, drawing each person's distinct study of the story that they have told. Their knowledge has instant firsthand, isn't what it has been seen. Experience of people in a care, first hunger and then thirst are lost, says Dr. James Hamlick. Speech is lost next, followed by vision. The lost senses go, as usual, hearing and touch. Usually it doesn't hurt. When death is slow and natural, the scientists say there is no distress. Our perception, as Dr. David Hua says, get weaker as we die. You may be unaware even what's going on. A lot of cardiac arrest survivors say their unconscious period have amazing experience within the brain. She says they see lights and describe an experience as a realer than realer sensation. What comes after light, though, after what known as to humans, most dying people then close their eyes and appear to be sleeping, says Dr. Halbeck. From this point on, we can often infer what is actually happening. So what do you think of the afterlife? Do you believe in it? Do you believe that we come back for another life form, such as being a dog or a cattle or so forth? Let me know down in the comments below. Anyways, thanks for watching. Bye-bye.